Welcome aboard. Happy to have you guys here today. This is unrelated to your normal rigmarole that you need to do in your classes today. What we are doing is we are commemorating the fact that today is Constitution Day. In the state of Missouri, by law, if your school takes any government money whatsoever, you are mandated in the state of Missouri to commemorate the Constitution in some way on Constitution Day. I don't exactly know what happens if you don't. Do we end up going to jail? It's a tough business, but I don't think that's what happens. Regardless, what's that? We don't want to know. Probably a bunch of stuff where they fiddle with our school license. But regardless, today what we are doing to commemorate the Constitution is talk about a handful of states across our country exploiting a loophole in it. Let's talk about it today. But first things first, just want to remind you, this event, my name is Andrew Crocker. The person yelling at me a moment ago was Kara Griffin. We are your faculty co-sponsors for Politically Active. We are a thank you. We are a nonpartisan student organization. Raise your hands if you're in the cabinet people, largely over here. We got a cabinet person down the straightaway. Anyways, please speak with anybody who had their hand up a moment ago if you're interested in getting involved in anything that we have going on. We do not ask that you be nonpartisan. You be as partisan as you wish to be, but we properly, as the club, take nonpartisan stances. So what we're doing today, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news from last week, but there's a little wackadoo in the state of Missouri. And so we're going to take an opportunity to talk about that. And it was a little crazy last week because of the week before. The week before had a tragic, seemingly politically motivated assassination of Charlie Kirk. It had a very controversial vote in the Senate to not release the Epstein files. And then it also had this. So what happened, I just want to give ourselves a moment here that what happened on September 10th was thousands of angry Missourians stormed the Capitol and peacefully protested. Was it vigorous? Did sometimes they sound very upset? Did sometimes people say mean words to each other? Yeah, but it was completely peaceful, no arrests, no property damage. And instead, America is consumed with a tragic political assassination where somebody couldn't remain peaceful. So just credit to our fellow Missourians for being able to express themselves in responsible ways. Why are they upset? What is happening? Well, to remind you, we need to zoom way out here. And I know we have a lot of PLS 101 students in the room. So allow me to just walk you through this. We have three branches of government right here. You have two on the your left-hand side are responsible for making laws. The executive branch doesn't make laws, but it does play a role. And then you have the legislative branch. Our legislative branch is bicameral. It has a House of Representatives and it has a Senate, and they need to work together to make laws. Spoiler alert, they don't do great at making laws these days. So I do want to remind you that here in America, we have two major political parties. We have the Republican Party that is more conservative. We have a Democratic Party that is more liberal or progressive, whatever adjective you prefer to use. Right now, all three of these lawmaking entities are all controlled by the Republican Party. Don't get used to that. America's on a pendulum. Sometimes it's Democrats, sometimes Republicans. We just happen to be in an era right now where it's complete Republican control. Now, that might not be for long. We do have a midterm election coming around the corner a year and a few months from today. And these midterm elections are very important whenever we get ourselves a new president. In 2008, we get Barack Obama, a Democrat. And then the very first midterm elections he faces, he loses the House to Republicans. Donald Trump gets elected in 2016. The very first midterm election he faces, he loses the House to Democrats. 2020, Joe Biden gets elected. He is a Democrat. Very first midterm election he faces, he loses the House to Republicans. And then, of course, we get Donald Trump last year, became president this year, and the very first midterm elections, who knows? But there's just something in the 21st century about the House of Representatives. The second America says we want this guy and this perspective to lead us, we immediately change our minds and decide not to vote him out or anything, but certainly to neuter his power a little bit by voting the other party in, for some reason, specifically in the House of Representatives. So Democrats feel a real good momentum swing in their favor to take the House in 2026. It's important at this point to also remind you that the House of Representatives splits up its 400 some seats by population. That means some states that don't have a lot of population, Alaska, they have the smallest number of people that you can ask to represent their state in the House. That's one. One person represents Alaska in the House of Representatives. Texas is really big. Texas is really big, and as a result, it has 38 people representing it. In the House of Representatives, Texas is worth 38 Alaskas. That's how the population sorts out. Now, Missouri is a medium-sized state, and so Missouri has 8 seats. So that then begs the question, how do you draw the lines across the state of Missouri to give us 8 districts? How do you do it? Do you want to do it this way? How's that work out? Not necessarily, right? Because first of all, there's population differences between these districts. Second of all, that just, I mean, it's just aesthetically, there's got to some credit for style points. Come on now. So as a result, how do we actually draw our lines? Well, in the past, we've drawn it like this. It's back when we had 9 districts once upon a time. More recently, we've drawn it like this. Now, you'll notice those districts right over there by St. Louis tend to be a little smaller because they have a lot of people. And look at northern Missouri, right? Like, what's in northern Missouri? You know, probably a few people's aunts and uncles. And then that's it. That's why that district is enormous, right? So it's important to remember that these lines, sorry, it's being blocked a little bit by our guest speaker that we'll have in a little bit, but these lines are actually drawn by our representatives in Missouri's General Assembly. Do you know what the General Assembly is? It's Missouri's Congress. For some reason, we call Missouri's Congress the General Assembly, and we do this every 10 years after a census. Anyways, this is called redistricting, and guys, redistricting is a good thing. It's a good thing to redistrict your state every 10 years or so when that census comes down, and make sure that as many people are as accurately represented as possible, that these districts are equal, that as people move around, we can reshape the districts to fit whatever new communities begin forming. The problem is that when it's time to redraw the lines, that's not really what we do. What we really do is called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is when you redraw these lines for political advantage. So you will clownishly draw lines, and I mean clownishly, to carve districts that will work specifically for the people that already hold the seats, making it really, really hard to beat them. We call that gerrymandering. And redistricting, as good as it is for America, as necessary as for America, as good witch of the East as it is for America, gerrymandering is the wicked witch of the West. It is the version of district line drawing that is maybe even anti-democratic. Because what's democracy? Democracy is voters choosing their leaders, right? But that's not what gerrymandering is. Gerrymandering is leaders choosing their voters. Now, I know that sounds really clownish, that we just draw lines that favor one side or another, and I don't want to let you know, it's rarely as clownish as I'm making it sound. It's actually worse. Okay, now here in Missouri, we are run by the Republican Party here in Missouri. It's a very Republican-friendly state. But I want to be clear that while Republicans are gerrymandering this state on a regular basis, this is not a Republican sin. It's a bipartisan sin. There are almost as many states that Democrats control, such as Maryland. And they gerrymander just as bad in those states as Republicans do here. This is the 3rd district in Maryland. You'll notice the 83rd Congress, like 80 years ago, actually looks like a community. See how nice and compact that is? Actually looks like people that might have something in common with each other. And then it starts to morph, right? The 98th Congress, you'll notice that district is growing a tail, and it has like a cookie bite out of the middle of it. What's happening there? Well, it's increasingly swallowing up neighborhoods and communities that we think will vote for whoever it is that holds this seat, and increasingly excluding people that we're pretty sure won't vote for them. And then it ends up with this monstrosity at the 113th Congress. Look at this. This right here makes no sense unless you're asking yourself 2 questions. Who's going to vote for me? Who's not going to vote for me? Now you'll notice that the district has to be contiguous. It has to be contained. It has to be all be touching each other, which is why that part of the map is so strange, where they literally just gerrymander a road to connect two different parts of the districts. Really radical stuff in Maryland and in states across America, and Missouri is no stranger. I will say Missouri does not have a district that goofy looking, but we got some others that you might enjoy here in a few. So with that in mind, Missouri says maybe we need to change this. And in 2018, Missouri voters, driven by progressive liberal groups here in the states, put something on the ballot that we voted on in November 2018. Show of hands if you voted in 2018. Show of hands. We got a lot of young people in the room. If you voted in 2018, maybe you voted on this. This was Clean Missouri. This says instead of having politicians draw the maps, let's have somebody called a demographer. We'll draw it instead. And it passed very aggressively, 62% to 38%, only to be reversed 2 years later. Once again, this time around it was conservative groups, once again, kind of a conservative Republican state. I don't mean to shame Republicans. Today may seem like beating up on Republicans a little bit, but this is a bipartisan problem. We just happen to be in this state where it's Republicans doing it. But they put an amendment on the ballot that give politicians power back when it comes to redrawing it. And this ends up passing very narrowly, 51% to 59% in the state. And that's where we find ourselves right now. And that leads to the controversy of the redistricting wars of 2025. The White House, concerned that they might lose the House, understandably so, starts pushing Texas to start carving out seats. They want as many as 5. Texas gerrymanders. We're 5 years removed from a census, right? But they do in fact do it. They redraw the congressional map, give 5 more seats to Republicans in the next round. California says that they are going to start doing the same thing. Florida says they are going to start doing the same thing. New York, Oregon, maybe, but a handful of states are saying, okay, this is an arms race. We're not going to sit this one out. We're going to redraw our maps to try to win votes for Democrats, if you're a more Democratic-friendly state, or Republicans, if you're a more Republican-friendly state. And that brings us to Missouri. So this is a proclamation from Governor Kehoe of Missouri announcing a special session of Congress, meaning the General Assembly really only meets in the spring. They really only meet from January to May, but every now and then when he wants to do something extra special, he will force them to gather out of session. That's what happened last week. Last week, he announced the Missouri First map, and this is what it ends up doing. This is what Missouri looked like beforehand. You'll notice that Missouri is what we call a 6-2 state. 6 of these districts are very Republican friendly, and then you have 2, which is District 1 over there in St. Louis, and then District 5 over there in Kansas City tend to be very friendly for Democrats, and they changed it to a 7-1 state. Now you'll notice, look at Kansas City. So Kansas City is the one that really ends up, losing. Missouri loses a Democratic-friendly seat in that Kansas City area because they kind of just siphon out part of the city into a more rural area, right? So you can see how this would be friendly for Republicans. That brings us to our guest speaker, Denise Lieberman. We're going to throw it to her, and she's going to explain what the heck is going on. Let me expand the screen here, ma'am. Hey, first of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Would you like to go ahead and share your screen? Because my understanding is you wanted to pick up more or less where I dropped off with your own presentation.
That's right. Let's try and do that. Okay.
Stand by. As we wait, any questions for the presentation we just had or any thoughts you'd like to share? Baldeep, ma'am.
Hi, am I back?
1 second, Denise. Just 1 second. Go ahead. Let's have Denise weigh in on that momentarily. Ma'am, first of all, any luck with the screen sharing?
Whoopsie. Yep, I think so. Let's try it again. Can you see my slides?
I can't see your slide. Yep, I can now. First of all, I neglected to introduce you properly. Can you tell us your position and what role you play in this process right now?
Uh-oh, what just happened? Okay, can you see these slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hi, everybody. I don't know why that's happening. Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Lieberman. I'm the director and general counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. And I am on a Mac, and my Mac does not like Microsoft Teams. So I think that's what's happening here. I will try to keep going with my slides, but if not, I'll talk. um, I've been a voting rights and constitutional lawyer for the last 25 years, and I currently head the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and litigate cases related to voting rights um, across the state of Missouri and around the country. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is Missouri's nonpartisan state voting rights table. We work to advance voting that is free, fair, and accessible for all Missourians, with particular focus on communities who are underrepresented in our democracy, communities who have historically faced barriers in our democracy, and communities who shoulder disproportionate burdens of discriminatory voting laws and practices. I'm really sorry about that. And we do this by anchoring 4 areas of work in Missouri, including policy advocacy, which normally we wouldn't be doing at this time of year since, as Andrew mentioned, as your professor mentioned, the legislature is usually not in session right now, but it's been a busy few weeks in the Missouri legislature as we were anchoring the legislative response to the governor's call for a special extraordinary session. We also anchor strategic litigation on voting rights in Missouri. And we have 2 cases pending right now, constitutional law cases, since it's Constitution Day, pending in front of the Missouri Supreme Court. We also work to do programs like this. I just spent the day today in Kansas City doing a program with Missouri's clerks and elections authorities to educate them about accessibility issues. And we also anchor the nonpartisan election protection program in the state of Missouri that includes attorneys as well as monitors at polling sites throughout the state to help voters immediately in real time as they are navigating the process on election day. And we can get them on the phone with an attorney immediately in real time, so nobody has to leave a polling place without casting a ballot. So here's an example of some of our election protection volunteers around the state. And here's an example of some of the educational materials that we put together to really help demystify the process. We know that disinformation, misinformation, and just the complexity of election laws altogether can be real barriers in and of themselves. So like I said, we are in court, and these are 2 constitutional cases we're currently litigating, and then I'm going to jump right into the redistricting stuff. This case right here, NAACP versus the state of Missouri, this challenges a law passed in 2022 here in Missouri that mandates strict photo ID requirements to vote. We have argued that this violates the Missouri Constitution's right to vote provisions. And indeed, the Missouri Supreme Court has concluded that limiting the forms of ID to only the kind you get at a DMV that must be current or only recently expired can infringe on fundamental right to vote because there are a lot of people who may lack the underlying documents necessary to get a state ID or the ability to get to a motor vehicle office. And so while that case is being litigated, that law is in fact in effect. And so we are also trying to make sure that people have the kinds of ID that they need. A second case that we are litigating in the Missouri Supreme Court is a First Amendment case. This challenges a law passed in 2022 in Missouri that criminalizes certain third-party voter registration activity. And also makes it a felony to encourage anybody to obtain an absentee ballot application. Not the ballot itself, just the blank application, which can be found, by the way, on the Secretary of State's website. So even directing you there would apparently be a felony. With many students like you, I bet there are a number in this audience who may still be registered to vote at your parents' home and may be voting absentee. So the good news is we won this case at the trial court. They concluded that it violates the freedom of speech and expression to encourage people to participate. And the state of Missouri has appealed that to the Missouri Supreme Court. And we are just getting ready to file our brief in that case. And so I want to jump in and talk about what is going on here. And if you are interested in more information, please feel free to scan this QR code and sign up for our newsletter. So here's why we're here today, right? Missouri, a few days ago, became the second state out after Texas to answer Trump's call to gerrymander Missouri's congressional maps. And they did that at record speed, running these pieces of legislation through the legislature very, very quickly. And in fact, suspending a lot of the regular rules that lawmakers must take in order to get this passed in a matter of about a week and a half, less than 2 weeks. And in fact, this legislation did pass on Friday, and also on Friday, 2 lawsuits were filed, as well as an initiative, as a referendum petition to undo these maps. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't share with you that the new maps are not the only thing that Missouri lawmakers did when they returned for this extraordinary session. They also passed a resolution that will be on the ballot in November of 2026 that will essentially end the ability of citizens to take citizen initiative petitions to the ballot by making it incredibly difficult for those, virtually impossible for those measures to win. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that and then jump into the redistricting. In the wake of both of these attacks, both regulating the district lines in ways that give the people, particularly of Kansas City, less representation, and then creating a process whereby those very citizens will face extreme difficulties trying to propose their own ideas if they feel underrepresented by their lawmakers, is sort of a sucker punch, both the left and the right, to democracy in Missouri. And that is what brought so many people to the Capitol. My organization, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, along with Missouri Jobs with Justice and the Missouri Workers Center, we were the 3 organizations that anchored last week's protest and rally at the Missouri Capitol. And we were told that it was the largest such activity inside the Capitol ever. We estimate about 5,000 people showed up at the Missouri Capitol this past Wednesday to make their discontent known. And in addition to that, Missouri, this is a Wednesday. People are in school. People are at work. People took time off from their jobs, from their classes, including people who are, working class folks who must take a day off work without pay in order to come there, and drove, in many cases, 2 hours or more to get to the Capitol to make clear that lawmakers heard their discontent with this process. And the very next day, they came back for a second time to testify in the Missouri Senate against these maps. Not a single person showed up to testify in favor of the maps. Indeed, United States Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, whose district stands to be decimated by these maps, actually flew in himself. He left Washington, D.C. Wednesday night to come and show up to testify himself in the Missouri Senate that Thursday. And then, without taking a moment to even consider the hours of testimony that witnesses presented, the committee passed the measure out, and the very next day, lawmakers suspended the rules and then passed the resolution. With respect to the citizen initiative process, they did the same thing, only the citizen initiative process was a resolution, not a piece of legislation. Because the citizen initiative process is actually written into our Constitution, the only way to change it is by amending our Constitution. The irony here is that this measure would require for citizen initiatives, and well, let me step back for a second. There are two ways that Missouri voters can decide whether to change our Constitution. And by the way, anytime we change our Constitution, it can only happen by a vote of the people. Lawmakers themselves cannot change our Constitution. However, so it has to be approved by the voters, but there are two ways that proposed new measures get on our ballot. One, citizens can propose an idea. And if enough people agree it should get on the ballot by signing a petition, it goes on the ballot. And if the majority of people agree, it can become law. When the legislature makes a proposal, and that's why this is called HJR3, House Joint Resolution, it's called a resolution. And as long as they vote, a majority of lawmakers vote to put it on the ballot, it gets on the ballot. So here's what this would do. It would say that when citizens propose a new measure and they get it on the ballot, that measure must pass not only by a majority of the voters of Missouri, but also by a majority of all 8 of Missouri's congressional districts. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, right? We're using the word majority, we're a majority rule. But when you step back and you actually look at what it would do, you start to see how insidious it is. Because each of our congressional districts must be roughly the same size, that means that each of Missouri's 8 congressional districts makes up about 12.5% of Missouri's population. So that means that under 7%, if any one single district has 49.9% vote on the issue would fail for the entire state, meaning that under 7% of Missouri voters could veto the measure, even if 93% of Missouri voters voted for it. And that's just looking at the actual eligible voters. The Missouri Independent did a study looking at the actual voter turnout from 2024, because not everybody comes out, we know that, and found that as few as 5% of Missouri voters could defeat initiative petitions under this legislation. And it's, in my view, quite disingenuous, given that if lawmakers think this is such a great idea, the sponsor in committee hearings said, we should have a broad consensus if we're going to change our Constitution. I would suggest to you that a majority is a broad consensus. But the fact that their own resolutions to change the Constitution would not be subject to this high standard. And lawmakers are putting measures on our Constitution. Just this year, in May, Missouri lawmakers passed a resolution to re-put abortion on the ballot next year. And so when lawmakers place a measure on the ballot to ban abortion, it would only need to pass by 50%. But when citizens put a measure on the ballot to protect abortion, it would need to pass by that up to 95%. So that doesn't feel fair, right? And that's exactly what we argued. And so we are now looking at having to run a campaign to educate voters about what this resolution would do. Right? Okay. Back to the maps, because that's what everybody is here to see. I wanted to talk about the initiative petition stuff because those two really go hand in hand in terms of creating barriers at all ends, at both bookends of the spectrum, right? Rigging the district lines so that representation isn't fair, and then blocking citizens from going about it on their own to try and propose new laws. So let's dig into this redistricting. And Andrew, I'll be done in just a few minutes. I know you wanted to have some time for questions, and I'll be sure to leave at least 15 minutes for questions. Okay, so as we all know, why is redistricting happening now? And for those of you who haven't been following this stuff for all that long, it might feel weird to you, and it is weird because this is 2025. Typically, redistricting happens every 10 years after the census. Yet all of a sudden, in 2025, we're seeing states around the country being asked or pressured or taking on this redrawing of district maps. And so Missouri is not alone. Of course, we saw the actions in Texas, and we've seen the responsive actions in California. So Texas redrew its maps to get rid of 5 Democratic seats to give 5 Republican seats. And so California responded by trying to get rid of 5 Republican seats to make those Democratic seats. Now, how do you know when how these seats are going to vote? You don't know exactly, but what you can do is make very educated guesses based on how you draw the district lines and what you know about the people that live in those communities and how they voted in the past. And that can give you a very good likelihood with a high degree of statistical certainty. And so Missouri is not the only one on the chopping block, because we only got rid of 1 Democratic seat. Right? You see that there's several that could come up for grabs in Ohio as well as in Indiana, but they came to Missouri first. And this is a probably poorer drawing than that your professor showed you. But what you can see here, in particular on the left side, look at the number 5 that's in blue. That's Kansas City. That's Congressional District 5. And it looks a lot smaller than, say, 6 and 4 and 8. And that's because these districts are rooted in population. And where 5 is Kansas City, a heavily populated area. If you look far to the right, where the other blue one is, that's St. Louis. It's also heavily populated. Because all the districts have to be about the same population, right? You're going to see much larger geographic areas in some of the more rural parts of the state. But it also makes sense, since Kansas City is an intact community, to have one district that covers that community, that has a lot of shared interests and values. What they did was slice up Kansas City into 3 parts, giving some of it up on that 6th district, meaning that northern part of Kansas City is now going to share a congressional district with farmers on the Illinois and Iowa border, all the way from Kansas City. Those in the southern part of Kansas City will now be sharing a district with folks almost all the way down towards the Arkansas border. And those in the urban center of Kansas City are going to be sharing their congressional district with rural Missouri and the dorms at Mizzou. This is incredibly unpopular, not just here in Missouri, but across the country, and also across partisan lines. A majority of Democrats and Republicans think that drawing these lines in a way to dictate political outcomes is problematic. Fewer than 10% of Missourians think that this should be happening right now. And that's why you're seeing such an uproar that's going on about this. Even here in Missouri, which is incredibly conservative, its legislature tends to be more conservative than even the voters of Missouri. We saw Republican leaders, even the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who was one of the leaders that allowed this to go through, voted no on it. And as did a number of other Republicans. So this vote did not come down completely on party lines. And just to be clear on what we're talking about here, and then I'm going to tell you the lawsuits that have been filed. There's a number of terms. Your professor went over some of them, but there are a little bit terms of art in this process. So reapportionment is when we get the census every 10 years. And I mentioned that each district has to be about the same number of people. So we count everybody in the state and then we figure out, divide it by 8 and figure out how many people each district gets, right? Redistricting then is how we adjust the district lines to ensure that every district has about the same number of people. Gerrymandering is redrawing those district lines in a way that is intended to advance a particular kind of political gain. Again, by looking at the data about where people are and how they typically vote, right? And so that's this idea of gerrymandering. A gerrymander is a conscious attempt to draw district lines to increase the likelihood of a particular political result. And sometimes what that means is if you really want to pick your voters, you're like, well, I want some of the people up in this neighborhood and then some of the people over in that area down there and some people over there. And they can be districts that look that aren't necessarily kind of in one contiguous shape. And when you sort of step back and you saw something similar to this in Andrew's slides, you can see that there's a lot of ways to divide people up, right? And so if you've got, 60% orange and 40% purple, you could do it fairly to give, 3/5 of the seats to orange folks and 2/5 of the seats to purple folks. And you could do that in a number of different ways too. But gerrymandering, as you can see here, is you can also draw those seats in ways to give much less representation to folks that may deserve more, or more representation to folks whose numbers suggest they deserve less. And Missouri was already pretty gerrymandered before this happened, because our state is approximately 40% Democrats, 60% Republicans, kind of like this chart. And yet Democrats only had about 25% of the representation. There's two ways to gerrymander. One is called packing. That's where you take all the communities of color and kind of smush them all into one district when maybe they have enough population to have political power in two. That's sort of what happened is the case in the city of St. Louis, where almost all the African Americans are in that first congressional districts. Or you can do what's called crapping. And that's kind of what just happened in Kansas City, where they took Kansas City and sliced it up. And they sliced it up along some neighborhoods that are well known to be really important enclaves for the African American community. And that's kind of what Congressman Cleaver came in and talked about the other day. And here's the thing. It sounds like it should be illegal to rig the maps for political gain. But the United States Supreme Court has said not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's okay for lawmakers are inherently political, to make decisions about district lines based on their politics. And if they've got enough votes in the legislature, they're going to prevail. However, if you use race as the way that you're looking at how to rig up the lines, that's going to be illegal under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the question there is, does the map deny minority voters an equal opportunity to participate and elect candidates of choice? There's an argument to be made that is the case in Kansas City because of the way the new map splits up Kansas City's Black community. And there's a lot of history around that. This map goes right down a street in Kansas City called Troost. And for those of you not familiar with Troost, it was kind of the Kansas City's Mason-Dixon line, if you will, until the passage of the vote of the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. African Americans were not allowed to live west of Troost. And so you have a huge concentration because of this historical system that has resulted in the majority of African Americans living in that area. So splitting that up could be said to violate the Voting Rights Act. And I've been talking with some national voting rights lawyers who are thinking about bringing this kind of a claim, challenging the maps.
Denise, may I jump in?
Okay, I was going to talk about the Missouri Constitution next.
Okay, well, I have a couple questions based on your presentation so far that I'd love to hear answers from you. First of all, one of our students, Boldeep, had a question earlier. I'd like to actually hear your response to it.
Sure.
I guess it was a comment.
I went to Stephanie Hine is my district representative for the Missouri General Assembly. So I go to all of her town halls, and at that town hall, she told me that it is actually unconstitutional to conduct this new redistricting because either a lawsuit has to happen or the census has to happen, and neither of those things have occurred in the year 2025 to create this redistricting. Is that true?
Well, that's take a look at the slide that you're looking at right now. That was a perfect question. Thank you, Professor, because this is what the Missouri Constitution says. And yes, it is true. So the one reason this is so odd is that we do this every 10 years. And it doesn't mean that it's always going to be illegal all over the country to do it at another time. But each state is a little bit different. And so Texas, for example, does have a history of sometimes going back and having to redraw district lines in the middle of a decade. Missouri does not. And Missouri's Constitution, which you're looking at right now, Article 3, Section 45, says clearly when the district lines can be drawn for congressional redistricting. And it states that it can only be drawn when the census data is certified to the governor. That's when the General Assembly shall divide the states into those districts. And so that's exactly right. And in fact, I am part of a lawsuit that was filed on Friday arguing that these maps are unconstitutional for this very reason, that our Constitution prohibits legislators from redrawing district lines except after the census has taken place. And indeed, they've already done so. We got the 2020 census results in, and they, in fact, drew the lines the census data came in 21 and they drew the lines in 2022. And in fact, they rejected a 7-to-1 map, just like the one they passed the other day when they did so based on this census data. And since that time, to make this even more compelling, what we know is that there's been a huge population surge in places like Kansas City. Turns out Kansas City is kind of hip and a lot of people are moving there. And so they're not included in these new lines either. And the General Assembly will have their opportunity come 2030, when all these new people get to be counted too, to in fact might require that Kansas City get even more representation. So that's one lawsuit, and I'm part of this lawsuit arguing that it's unconstitutional. And just to put a finer pin on this, since this is the section relating to congressional redistricting, and it says only after the census data, there's another part of our state constitution that relates to just state legislative, like how Missouri House and Missouri Senate seats. And they also say here that the census data has to be used for this, but it includes a provision saying that it could be altered from time to time. Not so for congressional redistricting. Therefore, they can't do it. The second lawsuit argues, in addition to that, that this map is not done the way that our Constitution requires it be done. That the sort of gold standard of redistricting is that you keep intact communities together. And so our Constitution says it has to be contiguous, meaning, you know, like right next to each other, and as compact as possible, like, say, the city of Kansas City. And so when you look at that map and you see how Kansas City now is going to be sharing the same district with farmers on the Iowa and Illinois border, it is not contiguous and it's not compact. So that's a second lawsuit. And that lawsuit,
may I interrupt you ever so briefly?
Of course.
We have another question.
Yeah.
I was just curious, you're saying where it says it can only be done after the census, because the slide you have up doesn't say that anywhere on there.
Well, it does say.
Can.
Right, and that's the argument that lawmakers have offered as to why it's not unconstitutional. But it does state, and there's some, without getting too much in the weeds, there's some laws of statutory construction about how the court is supposed to read this provision of the Constitution. And it states when the census data is certified, that's when the General Assembly shall. And so it creates a precursor, a mandatory precursor to drawing the maps. Now, lawmakers say, well, it doesn't mean that that's the only time we can draw the maps. Another rule of statutory construction says if there's language in the Constitution allowing something in one provision and silent in the other, it means that the intent was not to allow it for the other. Given that this provision allows some alterations mid-decade, and that language is not included with congressional redistricting, also suggests that it cannot be done. And finally, there is a Missouri Supreme Court case that interpreted it, as I've stated as well.
Allow me to jump in with another question, ma'am. We have another student.
So when it comes to talking with someone, whether on the same or different side of the aisle as you, about gerrymandering versus redistricting, is there a way to point out, oh no, they weren't doing the right thing, they were trying to manipulate it? Because when a president's ordering, it's a little bit more obvious that, like, hey, we shouldn't be doing that, that's not right. But when it's just like, oh, this state happens to have like 3 more spots that were taken from the other party, how can you go, well, no, actually what they did wasn't fair. It didn't just happen to work out in their favor. Here's what they did to kind of like skew the game, for lack of a better term.
Right. Well, I think it's kind of understanding the difference from redistricting itself, which is something that has to happen every 10 years based on the number of people. It's really about keeping district sizes the same, right? And gerrymandering is, let's take a look at the maps and see who lives there and try and manipulate what streets we go down in order to get the kind of people we want, right? That's what gerrymandering is. But again, gerrymandering is done all the time. It's not necessarily illegal, but it cannot be done in a way that creates really crazy looking districts like this one here. This is an old one. This is kind of the historical beginning of gerrymandering. And it can't be done in a way that splits up minorities and racial or ethnic minorities or communities of color. And those things are illegal. And it also cannot be done in a way that improperly sort of dilutes the vote. So one way to talk about it, I think, is, Missouri is 40% Democrat, 60% Republican, just like this slide. And yet, instead of giving, 40-60, which would be like a 5-3 map, they're giving less than 20% to Democrats.
Ma'am, let me jump in with another question.
Sure.
Oh, I just had like one other question, because recently in the textbook I saw about majority minority. Do you think like Republicans, how they're redrawing it, is going to try to say that Kansas City is a majority minority district instead of it just being like a community?
Yeah, so that's just the opposite, actually. They've split up the Black vote in Kansas City so that it can no longer be, and it actually wasn't even a majority minority district. So the 5th congressional district was, I think, around 25-30% African American, and I forget the demographic data on Hispanic and Latino, which is also a growing population in Kansas City. And so there was clearly at least a critical mass in that 5th district to elect a candidate of color. By splitting up, again, like by going down a street like Troost and splitting up the Black and brown community, they will no longer be able to elect a candidate of choice, right? And so that's what we talk about when we say majority minority district, where there's a district that the majority of the people who live there are a racial or ethnic minority. So that would be the case in, say, St. Louis in the 1st congressional district.
Ma'am, we have another question.
Hi, it's Baldeep again. This question is about the rating for the new district map. Our current rating is an A+ system, to my understanding. Do you know what the new map might have a rating of? Is there any I haven't been able to find any information online, because apparently they've used the 2020 census data, but there's no confirmation about that either. It's very vague.
Yeah, so this map just passed like a couple days ago. So literally Friday. Right. So yeah, but as you can see here, it's not contiguous, it's not compact, and it doesn't keep intact communities together. Those are the 3 cornerstones of how we do districting, right? That you want communities to who share common interests. Doesn't mean that everybody's monolithic in a community, but say people who live in Kansas City, all like the Kansas City Chiefs, right, or something like that. Certainly will be aligned around the Kansas City Chiefs in a much different way than somebody in Hannibal, Missouri would be, who's up on the Iowa border, who now shares the same congressional district as those people. So this certainly would not get a good rating because it's very, very, very spread out, first of all, and it dissects into 3 pieces an intact city like Kansas City.
Last question, ma'am. While these lawsuits are going through challenging this current redistricting effort, what map will hold for 2026? Is it the previous maps prior to this redistricting and your lawsuit, or does this new redistricting effort hold unless your lawsuit is successful ridding it?
That is such a great question. Thank you for that, Professor. Yeah, so here's the crazy thing. Maps are drawn as pieces of legislation. And legislation doesn't become effective until the governor signs it. And in this case, the governor has not signed this piece of legislation. So right now it is not in effect. In addition, specifically when it comes to maps, there's a provision in Missouri's constitution that says whenever the legislature passes a map, the citizens of Missouri have 90 days to get over 100,000 signatures to try and recall it on the ballot. And on Friday, right when this was passed out of the legislature, that referendum petition got filed as well. And so they're starting to collect the signatures necessary to get it on the ballot to repeal the 7-to-1 map. And once they get enough signatures within this 90 days, so it's like a December-ish timeframe, the new maps will be on hold, even if the governor signs it, until after the 2026 elections, when Missourians will have to vote on whether to repeal the new map or not. And they'll be doing so at the same time where they'll be voting whether to increase the threshold for citizen initiative processes. Plus, they'll be voting on whether to eliminate the right to abortion in our Constitution and a number of other measures as well that are likely that could affect and change our state constitution that may be on the ballot in 2026. So there's a lot going on. And so what happens if the governor, say, vetoes this map? Well, if that's the case, he might, to avoid this litigation, he could say, I'm going to veto this, and then lawmakers come back in January during the regular session and try and do it then.
Well, regardless, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Round of applause for Denise Lieberman taking the time to speak with us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Everybody else, consider on the table as you entered, we had a sign-in sheet. And if you put down your name and email address, is it Kara? You can also get notifications anytime Politically Active does stuff like this in the future. We do have food left over. Grab some. In the meantime, keep your eye on the maps. Thank you so much, guys. Happy Constitution Day. Thank you again, ma'am.
Happy Constitution Day.
Back at you.